So I am here to talk about a game called Dračí Doupě. I will be calling it Dragon's Den in this talk because it has this beautiful D&D abbreviation. How many people in this room cannot read Czech? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, this is going to be tough for you. Because I have some slides that are in Czech and I'm not going to translate them. You will soon realize why. So basically, this talk is about the history of Dragon's Den, how it came to be, and what kind of weird coincidences led to creation of this game. And mostly this is kind of disjointed collection of anecdotes that I'm going to be telling, and when I run out of anecdotes, this will be the end of this talk. So it all begins with a magazine called 100+1 zahraniční zajímavost, which means, in case you can't understand this, 100+1 tidbits of information from abroad. And you have to realize back in the 1980s, it was not possible to buy foreign press, not even Russian press, much less, say, French press, or, God forbid, US press. US magazines, US books, anything. Of course, internet was not even invented. In the 80s, it's hard to imagine, but yeah, try to transport yourself back into the Stone Age, and this is where we have been living. So people could buy a party press every morning, but if they were hungry for information from abroad, from information about the West, they couldn't go and buy The Time or Le Figaro or Die Zeit or anything like that, The Guardian. They could go and buy 101 tidbits of information from abroad. And these guys who were making this magazine, they had access to all these foreign newspapers, and they were going through them, and they were selecting these tidbits of interesting information and feeding it to the populace. And this is it was a bi-weekly magazine, so it was, well, I don't know, April 86. And this is a kind of typical selection you would expect to find in this magazine. So this is unsuccessful hunt for the murderers of Olaf Palme. Olaf Palme was a Norwegian prime minister, mysteriously killed. This is like failure of capitalism here. This is Alexei Meresiev, an ordinary human, ordinary man. This is from a magazine called Baby Flame, published in Moscow, and this is something, whatever, some like heartwarming story about some Russian guy. Then we have this, The School for the Killers, and that's again this perfidious, decaying imperialism in its finest form, making these killer schools where CIA and FBI train their puppets to do the dirty business in the countries of the Third World and try to sway them from the path to communism to the path to despair, decay, and destruction. And this is the continuation of the story. And you have to realize that back then we were reading it because the only thing you could read if you wanted to have any kind of information about what's happening behind Iron Curtain. And of course, we knew that this information is highly filtered. It's not objective selection. Yeah? Nonetheless, some information is better than no information at all. So actually, it was a very popular magazine, and we were reading it quite attentively. And so I was reading this in 1986, and I discovered this gem, Lurks in the Dragon's Den. And this is an article about this weird new pastime of American teenagers where they play a game where they pretend to be wizards or warriors, and then they start believing that they can actually cast magic and do whatever these characters are doing, and then they believe that they are immortal, and they jump out of a balcony and die somewhere here. And I was reading it and said, that's wonderful. I want to play this game. It's an amazing idea. I definitely want to do that. So, in 1987, 1 year later, my father, who is a theoretical physicist, got an appointment to give a lecture at University of Bristol in UK, which was very unusual because in general it was really difficult to be able to get to the West. However, by that time, the regime was running out of money, and anybody who could bring dollars or British pounds in this case to the Czech GDP was welcome to do so, even if it meant doing some compromises on the ideological front. So my father was allowed to go there for half a year, maybe just a few months, giving lectures in solid-state physics. And then he earned some money from the university, and he was able to invite us, the rest of the family, to join him. So I went, it was the first time I was going to the West. It was an amazing experience. My mother drove all the way from Prague to Bristol, UK, in our rickety old Polish Fiat, which was sort of miracle in and of itself. And then when we came there, I said, Mother, Father, I love you. You need to buy me Dungeons and Dragons, because that's all I want from life. And eventually, after some pestering and perseverance, I was able to persuade them, and they spent their hard-earned hard currency on something so weird and alien as Dungeons and Dragons basic rules. And that's all I got. Like, I got this box. It's not, unfortunately, a picture of my box because it's lost somewhere in the abyss of time. But it looked very much like this. These are some internet pictures. So I got a box like this. I read the rules. It was exactly as amazing as I imagined it will be. So I was really happy. And we started playing this game with my friends. And everybody was amazed because it's an amazing game. And you have to imagine yourself being there in this grayscale reality, which is like when, if I am looking for a metaphor about living in communist Czechoslovakia, it's this metaphor. It's like living in a grayscale image where there's no color. It's a completely desaturated image. Everything is gray. All people are gray. All the streets are gray. Nobody smiles. Everybody's just looking on the ground. People don't look each other in the eye. We were not starving. We were not shivering with cold. Yeah, we had some like a reasonable standard of living. Of course, much lower than we have today, but definitely survivable. So it was not about material poverty. It was about this lack of color. And then you had this game, and that was this door into the world of color. It was the door which you could go through and enter the world of imagination, of experiencing something beyond this drab, gray reality. And that was the most amazing experience for me and for my friends. So we were playing it. We didn't really know anything about it. We had to invent everything. Of course, we had the rule books, and so, but we didn't have any sort of connection to the community of people playing RPGs. We didn't have any other RPGs. We didn't have any magazines, anything. We really just had to make it up as we went. And by that time, it's like late 80s, say 88, I was active in Czech science fiction movement or science fiction subculture. I studied the Faculty of Maths and Physics in Prague, and that had its own science fiction club, and they were publishing their own magazine, which was called Viloidus Viridis. It means huňáč zelený, a green fluff thing, or green fluffy thing. And I was the editor-in-chief, and the only editor actually, of this article, of this magazine for a few years. And I am showing in here to try to explain this subculture of semi-legal science fiction publishing that was taking place. At the time, in this like very late 80s, it was possible to publish semi-legally and semi-illegally stuff that was not directly in opposition to the regime. So regime really didn't care about science fiction. I mean, they actively dislike it. You could buy all books published in science fiction since 1948 till 1989. You could buy all of them and stuff them in really not that big bookcase. I know personally several people who did it. Yeah, and they had these, I don't know, 30, 40 meters of bookshelves filled with exactly the same books. And that was it. Like, that was everything that was published. There were not that many books published, period. Like, you could go to a bookshop every Thursday where new books have been released, and you could see like 6, 7 books were released this week. So you could go through them and say, this one looks good, and buy it. And when you were visiting other people's, it was amazing. Like, they had their own bookshelves, and they had exactly the same books like the ones that you had at home, because there were no other books. So everybody had the same books. Yeah. So, but even then, the books that had been published were sort of either they were blatantly political books, so some Russian slop or Soviet slop, or they had been kind of intellectual books, because all the people who were running these publishing houses were actual intellectuals, and they really went through what has been published in US and England and Germany, and they took objectively the best books in case they were not too ideologically suspicious, and then they have them translated and released. So actually there were some really good books published, but very little science fiction because nobody at the time considered science fiction to be worth translating and publishing. So we really had maybe half a dozen books published a year, and half of that was written in Russian or Polish. So that was it. So we, the science fiction fans who wanted to read more, were publishing these books, and how it worked was that somebody got a book, a paperback from US, read it in English, said this is a good story, translated it into Czech. Nobody told the author about it. Certainly nobody was intending to pay the author anything. So somebody translated it, and then he had a friend, or friend of friend, that was working for something which was called Národní podnik, which means national company. It was just a state-run business. And these big state-run businesses, they have their own internal printing presses that they were using to publish all kinds of circulars and internal service, information books, or whatever. And basically, there were people who were operating these printing machines, and they stole the paper, and they stole the machine, or like time on the machine, and then in the off hours, or very often in their working hours, they were printing books like this one, and then they were selling it on the black market, which was, of course, technically illegal. Like, all of that was technically illegal. It was what's called in Czech rozkrádání majetku v socialistickém vlastnictví. Stealing socialist property. But people were doing it anyway, and police was very lax about it because they had some worse things to worry about. And besides, everybody was stealing socialist property, and this was really kind of minor theft. So this one actually was not printed on stolen paper. This was printed on the paper that belonged to the SSM, Socialistický svaz mládeže, Socialist Union of Youth. So this one was perfectly legal, which really does not matter. Anyway, our idea was, we will translate Dungeons and Dragons, we will print it as this semi-legal book, and then we will give it to people, and everybody will be happy. So that was really 100% altruistic impulse, and everybody who was contributing this was doing it for this altruistic impulse. You couldn't do it for money, because if you started doing it for money, then the police will notice, and then they would put you behind the bars. So, me and Vilma Kadlečková, who was not my wife then, but we were dating, had this routine that we would go somewhere, and I would be translating Dungeons and Dragons, and she would be writing it down. And we were going through it, and when we were almost finished, we were maybe through half of the Dungeons Master Rulebook. November 1989 came, and everything changed. There is a quote in Czech, čas oponou trhnul a změněn je svět, which is from Jan Neruda, so it doesn't have English version. Roughly, it means everything changed. So everything changed, and we no longer wanted to publish it illegally or semi-legally as a kind of black market. We want to release it as a real translation with the permission of copyright owners to really start doing D&D business in the Czech Republic. So I wrote a letter to TSR that at the time owned TSR was founded by Gary Gygax and Mark Anderson back in 73 or 76, and they owned the rights for Dungeons and Dragons. Many years later, they sold it to Wizards of the Coast, and then a few years later, it was bought by Hasbro. So now it's owned by Hasbro. But at the time, it was still owned by the original creators of D&D. So I wrote them a letter, and I faxed it to their fax number in US, which was now possible because I had a fax machine. And they never replied. So I sent them another fax. And we had a family friend who was a businesswoman, like actual real American businesswoman. And we told her about our predicament, and she called them in the US from a US number, and they didn't reply to her either. And many years later, I was working for Altar. Now I am jumping ahead, and we will get soon to how Altar was created. I was working for Altar, and we were publishing BattleTech under license from FASA, who are the owners of copyright for BattleTech. And I was at a dinner with them and with their lawyer, and the lawyer, we were like swapping stories, and he said he worked for TSR back then in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was telling me this like fantastic American accent, which I can't reproduce. I was working for the company, and then I discovered there is a cancer in the company. There is a cancer in the company. They were giving away stock. And what was happening was that Gary Gygax was giving employee stock to other people if he seemed to like them. Somebody did something nice, and he would give them few shares in TSR. And then one day, there was a woman who secretly bought the shares from the other employees, and suddenly she had more shares than Gary Gygax. And they had this proxy fight of shareholders, and that was about the time when I was trying to reach them. So they had these more important things to worry about than licensing D&D to weird post-communist country. And that was their last mistake, because as the communism ended, the door opened both ways, and new games were coming to Czechoslovakia, which at the time still was a Czechoslovakia. So I realized there are more RPGs than just D&D. There are GURPS, there is Schwarze Auge, the German ripoff of D&D. And basically, I and my friend said, well, actually, now looking at it, D&D, and this basic D&D especially, it's not such a great game. It's very limited. It has some weird mechanics. We think we can write a better game ourselves. If they don't want to sell us their license, screw them. We shall write our own game and release it, and it will be as good as the D&D. And we did. So we started working on Dragon's Den. And who was doing it? Who is we? So there was Martin Benda, who is brother of Marek Benda, and if you are here, if any Czech citizens are in this room, they certainly know Marek Benda, who is the longest serving member of parliament in our current parliament. And well, at the time he was 20, so he had a brother who was even younger than him, and he was one of the authors. Then the other author was Karel Papík. I wonder if somebody here ever heard about Mindware Studios and Cold War game? Sic transit gloria mundi. Mindware was one of the studios in like these late 90s, early 80s, where they did a game called Cold War. It was modestly successful, but it was a good game. And then Karel went on to create Banzai Interactive, and now he has a company called Product Fruits. It has nothing to do with games, and he's perfectly happy. And finally, there was Wilma, I already mentioned, and I. So we felt that we can't really take the text that we have that's translated from English and release it as our own work. So we had to rewrite all of it. And we dropped a ton of stuff that's in D&D, and we really created our own system. But of course, you have things like, what is RPG? Or how should you run an adventure as a dungeon master? Or you have like monster book, yeah, and you have here is orc, here is goblin, here is green slime. That's really difficult to sort of write differently, because that's kind of really basic. But we had to rewrite it all. In the end, we actually used, I would say, maybe 10, 20% of original Dragon's Den was the direct translation from English, which we had. We rewrote the rest, and there was no time to playtest it, so we just printed it and sold it. And there are a couple of funny stories which I will share. So firstly, I say printed. So how was it printed? It was printed on offset printing machines, as was the. And if you know anything about printing, probably many of you don't, but how it works is that you have to have this transparent page with the black text, which you put on this metal plate. Then you expose the plate, and then the areas that were covered with black are hydrophilic, so they attract water, and the rest is hydrophobic. So then you put the paint on it, and it only sticks to the places where the letters used to be, and then you push paper on it, and voila, you get a printed, you get a printed page. And this producing this transparency is very expensive. Oh, very expensive. It costs maybe few hundred crowns per page. Yeah, so that was the kind of money we didn't have. So what we did is we printed it all on an ordinary laser printer on pauzovací papír, tracing paper. And we did it on a print, and of course we didn't have our own printer, like even laser printer, because it was too expensive. So, but because of Martin and Marek, I had access to the offices of Christian Democratic Party of Czechoslovakia. So I went to the offices of KDS and printed 200 pages on tracing paper for Dragon's Den, and then we gave it to the printers. The second problem were the dice. When, of course, D&D is designed with 5 dice, it has 6 dice. It has the complete set of platonic solids and the 10-sided dice. And we said, who needs 20-sided dice? Nobody. That's who. The only die you really need is a 6-sided die and 10-sided die. And actually, 10-sided die would be good enough. So we said we really need 10-sided die. But we couldn't produce it, and we couldn't buy it. So we had one example of 10-sided die, which came in that basic D&D set that I bought in '87. So we went to a friend of ours who connected us to his father, who was able to create a metal mold for vstřikovací list. Well, somebody Google it. But these molds, of course, they need to, they are made from metal, and they have two parts, and they have to come together with no gaps, which is difficult to do when the object that you are molding has no plane of symmetry. So when you look at real ten-sided dice, which is produced by people who know how to do this thing, you will notice that there is no plane of symmetry that goes through the die, and therefore the form cannot be planar. The two parts that you have to have some kind of different shape that lock together. And that's too difficult. So if you look at this die, you will see it's a really unique die. No other game in the world has it, because it really has this plane of symmetry going this way. So it's like, imagine you have normal ten-sided die, you split it in half, push them apart a little bit, and fill the rest with something. And that's what we did. So that's one thing. So we were able to produce the form, the mold. Then we had to buy krasten, which is a plastic that's used in this vstřikolis to create this piece of plastic, which is sold in Caoutchouc Kralupy, little bit north from Prague, and it's normally sold by wagon loads. Yeah. So another member of our little group, Michal Brunec, went to Kralupy nad Vltavou with his trusty rucksack and got himself 20 kilograms of krasten, and they were looking at him as if he was crazy. And then we carried back to the people who had the form, and they were able to produce 5,000 dice like this. These dice are bought off the shelf, and they are bought off the shelf from retailers. It's not bought from some wholesaler. We were going to shops that were selling board games in Prague and asking, can you sell us some dice? And they were saying, okay, how many? And I said, all of them. No, really, how many? How many have you got? 600? Yes, 600. I pay in cash. So that's how we got 5,000 dice. And then we had it printed in Polička nad Svitavou. And if you are not Czech, Google it. Polička nad Svitavou is the literal middle of nowhere. No way, I apologize if somebody here is from Polička nad Svitavou. But it's like sort of on a different planet. And we were going there and back and talking to this. And for some whatever weird reason, we ended with this guy who had these offset printing machines. And he printed it. And then he told us he doesn't have a machine that can put the different pages together. So he gave us a box with 5,000 pages 1, 2, and then another box or package with 5,000 pages 3, 4, and so on. 70 packages with 5,000 pages each, and it was, of course, several packages. And said, good luck to you guys. So we took them to Prague, and we put them in the garage of Karel Papík, who's one of the guys I mentioned earlier. And then we called all our friends, and they all came to the garage, and then they were going in circles around these like little stations, and you had the 1, 2 station, and 3, 4 station, and 5, 6 station, and you took one page here, and one page here, and one page here, and when you finished the circle, you had one copy of the book, and you put it aside, and you start it again. And we were doing this for a week. And then we got these 5,000 books sorted, and then we had to buy the color cover. And this was drawn by an artist who was a friend of Wilma, and she drew it, and again I scanned it in the Christian Democratic Party scanner, and I do the color separation, and we found a guy who had this color offset machine, and I don't know his name, I never knew his name. I met him at Staroměstské Square, Old Town Square. I gave him 20,000 Czech crowns in cash, and he gave me twice 5,000 covers, because this is like, this is the player's rule book, and then we had the Dungeons Master, no, or did we? Oh, whatever. He gave me the color covers, and then we took them, and then we took the these loose pages we got in the garage, and we went to WUMS, which is Výzkumný ústav matematických strojů, which is Research Institute of Mathematical Machines. And there were we had another friend working there, and we were able to use their stapling machine to staple it together. So you see these three staples here were put there at Research Institute of Computers. And this is it. We managed to do it before Christmas, and that was important. And in 1990, on Christmas, we started to sell it, and we sold it almost instantly. And the rest is history. I am not going to treat you to more stories, because the rest is quite boring. The interesting part ends here. After this, Martin Benda went into communal politics. Karel went to found first computer game company. Wilma married me and said, mission accomplished. I don't have to pretend anything any longer. And finally, we got together with Michal Bronec and Martin Kučera from Ostrava. We released, this is Dech Draka, that's the magazine Martin and Rostya were publishing before we joined them. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And we released a sequel and another sequel. We released other games, Battletech and so on. Because of these games, I was able to meet many wonderful people for which I am deeply grateful. And eventually, we were able to find Altar Interactive in 1997 in Brno with some of the people I met on this journey. And we started doing computer games, and that's a different story. Thank you.